All right, welcome to the WatchWell Podcast. My name is Parker, and this is my co-host, Nick. Nick, how's your week?
Not too bad. Yours?
It was great. I guess we should really say how our month was, because it's been a while since we've done anything. So how has your month been?
I mean, great. I can't even remember the last time we recorded, so I don't even know what's happened since. But yeah, great month. Good new year.
New year.
So yeah, how about you?
It's been great. Apparently, Avatar is on the hot seat. Did you hear about this?
No.
You didn't hear about this?
I didn't hear about it.
It's a cultural appropriation to be a blue person these days.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. Something you said you don't know what's happened, so that's just the first thing that came to mind.
But it's also reached that $2 billion mark that James Cameron said it needed to make to break even.
It did.
It's
it did.
reached and exceeded.
Yeah. So it broke even. Yep. $2 billion to break even, right?
Hey, no, they've eclipsed it. So now they're profit from here on out.
Yeah, that's a lot of money, man. So today on the episode we have a guest. And we're going to start off with some fun facts. She's a Jesus follower. She's been married to her husband, John, for almost 19 years. She's got 2 fur babies, and she volunteers as a leader for the high school ministry at actually the church that we both go to. She loves to share her God moments on her podcast, Chasing Rainbows, ... Finding God.
Wait,
And
4 dots?
3 dots.
3 dots.
Yeah.
3
3
dots.
dots. Okay.
Make
I was
sure
going to
that we
say,
got
is that like a reference to The Office? Dot.
And she's worked at GPRS, or worked at GPRS, still work at GPRS 6 years in collections accountants resolutions. So she's on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and again, her podcast is on Spotify. It's called Chasing Rainbows ... Finding God.
Yeah.
Introducing.
You don't have to say the dots, though.
You don't have to say the dots.
No,
Okay.
it's yeah.
So this is Taryn. Hi, Taryn.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So obviously for the WatchWell podcast, we pick a movie, and you picked.
Dead.
What'd you pick?
Dead Poet Society.
Yeah. So why did you pick?
Old one.
Yeah,
1989. And I just have to say this really quick.
Go ahead.
What was so funny is I was talking to one of my former students, because I have been in high school ministry since 2009, and I have a student that probably graduated over 10 years ago.
Wow.
And so we brought up this podcast that we'd be recording today, because she was asking when my next podcast was going to come out. And so I shared about this one, and she looked, when I told her what movie, she looked right at me and just had no idea what I was saying. Like, what do you mean Dead Poet Society? And John, my husband, was like, what year were you born? Because the movie came out in 89. She's like, after that. So, yeah, she'd never had heard of it before.
You'll be happy to know that Parker was born after that as well.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my gosh. I feel so old. But
I'm 30.
yeah.
I was only born in 1992.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm still young.
You are very young.
But
yes. Embrace your youth. That's
I was
my
actually
advice.
curious. I'm sure Nick is the same. Why you picked Dead Poets? Because it's a great movie. It's one of the best movies, probably.
Yeah, honestly, I had forgotten about it, and so I originally had thought Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Yep.
For whatever reason, that movie just would not leave my mind, and I thought it's one of those movies that it's just so funny. And, it just, like, I literally laugh out loud, and it just would have been fun to watch again and to pull
I've never
out.
seen it.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, I haven't seen it either.
Oh, my God.
No, I haven't seen it. So.
Okay. So that's should be on your list to definitely watch just for fun.
Well, I mean, Steve Martin, right?
Yeah. And John Candy.
Yeah.
So he's another one that's super funny.
Yeah.
But I just thought, because you could pull out, I won't ruin it because you guys haven't seen it, but there are definitely some principles that you could pull out, and you could definitely apply here.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about that one, and I was also thinking, gosh, what was the other movie I was thinking that would have been a good one? There's a Tom Cruise movie, A Few Good Men.
Yeah.
Good Men.
Yeah.
Few Good Men.
Yeah.
You Can't Handle the Truth.
Yeah.
I totally wanted to do that one. And that was another movie that was just on my brain that I couldn't get rid of. And so I'm like, which one? And then we went out with a couple friends of ours last Saturday, and we were bringing this topic up, and so they had some other good movies to consider, like Philadelphia with Tom Hanks. I haven't seen that, and there's a couple other ones, and then
Denzel's in that movie too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But then right when I got home, I thought of Dead Poet Society, and then have you guys obviously both have watched it, and I don't want to, I won't be spoiling it, right? Because it's from 1989 movie.
Yeah. Right. Well, this is so the WatchWell podcast. It's a spoiler.
Okay.
Like,
Just know we're going to talk about the whole
everybody.
thing.
Like if you watch
everybody
it,
knows.
Everybody knows. We talk about the whole movie, the ins and outs of everything. And if you haven't seen it, then it's your fault for watching the podcast.
Right, yeah.
You should know.
Especially when it's from 1989.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I just thought that what we know at the end of what happened just is so relevant to today, and the heartbreak of what's going on today with our kids and
absolutely
just with people in general. So I just thought, wow, that there's so much in that movie. And when I watched it, man, there's so much more that I didn't even remember. So I'm excited. I'm excited that this movie is one of Robin. What is his name again? Thank
Robin
you.
Williams.
Oh my gosh,
Robin
my brain
Williams.
went dead. That's not a good sign. But anyway, he just did such a great performance, and it was such a great movie.
flawless.
Sure.
Nick, I'm actually looking up ratings and different things like that. Do you want to start off with your opinions of who should watch it, who shouldn't watch it?
So
Age ratings.
one of the things I found most shocking is that it's PG.
Oh wow.
That this movie is rated PG, and it just kind of
I didn't notice that at first.
because I mean I would never let like Lincoln's 5, obviously. Like you think PG movies typically, not always, but typically you're going to think kids movies and things like that. So unless what I saw was wrong, which feel free to correct me if that's the case.
I've got it pulled up right now on IMDb, and it's 1989, 2 hours and 8 minutes PG.
Yeah, I just thought that's kind of crazy because I mean, it's a very adult movie, like adult grown up themes and things like that, but from the perspective of teenagers and kids. But so in my mind, I would say staying right in line with typical PG-13 standards. So probably 13 and up.
Yeah.
And again, like we always kind of say that it depends on, you have to know your kid. You have to know what they can handle and what they're ready for and things like that. But just as a general rule, I would go with 13 and up.
Right.
I feel like there should be a rating PG-15. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. To kind of harmonize with that,
PG can drive. Like, can you drive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I think to harmonize with what Taryn was saying about 15, I don't know if you would even understand the movie.
Yeah.
Because you got to think like you have the relationship between school authorities with kids, school authorities with parents, parents and the school authorities, and then you have parents to kids and the pressures of that time period, and it kind of wraps up into the whole point of the movie,
right,
where you have all of this stress of life through the eyes of young men, or boys that have yet to become men. And a 5-year-old is just a 13-year-old is probably not even going to understand that.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Not grasp.
so at that point, at that point, why even let them watch it?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, and plus they don't know how it's going to end either.
Right. And then you have the suicide in there that at the end where Neil dies. Yeah. So he kills himself, and you're just not going to understand why he killed himself if you don't have the life experience. So no, I agree with 15. I think that's a good number for sure.
Yeah.
You
mentioned Neil from the movie. One of the things that instantly popped out to me, because I watched it again, to prepare for the podcast, and I'd seen it a few times in the past, but I guess the last time I saw it, I didn't recognize the actors, so I was like shocked.
Really?
When Neil is Wilson from House.
Right.
Like that just clicked in that was one of the first things that I noticed was the actors that I actually recognize, that I guess the first few times that I watched this movie, I had no idea or just didn't remember, like Ethan Hawke and obviously I knew Robin Williams, but I didn't know any of the others at the time. So I was kind of surprised to see that.
Excuse me. Well, the irony in the whole thing is Robert Sean Leonard, who plays Neil, like you
Mhm.
said, plays Wilson in House. But
Mhm.
in Dead Poets, his dad is pressuring him to become a doctor.
We got my
But it's so
doctor. Yeah.
So it's pretty
Everything
funny.
comes full circle.
It's all in the same universe.
Yeah.
Cool. So Taryn,
Yeah.
you talked a little bit about kind of why it was just on your mind, the movie, you couldn't get it out of your head. Is there a reason why you think, or
Yeah, I mean,
the suicide and kind of how it pertains to today?
yeah, I think several huge themes for me came out, and especially as we walk out in our faith. And I know the movie really didn't talk about faith at all, but like I said, you guys are pulling out
Mm-hmm.
things. But for my life, just understanding how important mentorship is,
Mhm.
how valuable my mentor is to me, and pointing me back to Jesus, encouraging me, seeing the best in me, seeing my potential, is able to pick me up when I'm down. And I feel like that was such a good representation of Robin Williams, Mr. Keating, character in the movie,
Mhm.
that he saw potential in these guys. He didn't want them just to follow the world of, this is how you have to be.
Right.
God has wired you differently, even though he didn't say that. But, that's the truth. We are all wired so uniquely, and God has a set purpose for all of us that he wants us to walk out and follow him and to be blessed by the path that he's chosen for us.
Right.
And so that was huge for me. Definitely also at the beginning of the school year, a Northview student took his life, and that really impacted our students and our high school ministry. And so just walking through that and being reminded of, now being on the other side of it as well, as being in that mentor position with these high school students, paying attention, what are these students really needing right now, and making sure that we're present in their lives and we're speaking the truth. We're pointing them back to Jesus and reminding them of their worth. I think the world is so hard right now on these kids and what they've had to walk through already. And we know the enemy is very full of deceit and lies, and he's so loud right now. And what these kids are agreeing with is so sad, that there's hopelessness and depression and anxiety and fear. So I just think tackling this issue, that.
Well, yeah, and that are you,
No, you're
I
good.
didn't mean
Yeah,
to cut you
no, you're
off,
good.
but I mean, there's a war on men right now in our
Absolutely.
society. So not only are these high school kids looking up to adult boys, if you will. They're not actually men. They're not rooted in any form of scripture. They're leaders, they're schools. Now, I'm sure obviously there's good people in their lives, but the question is, are they being told what the Bible says about them? Because I mean, I talked to a student maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, and he was being very open with some of the things that he struggles, and I sat down with him and I said, hey man, like, a lot of this can be resolved. You have to start with what God says about you. That's where you have to start.
Yeah.
And then once you start there, there's a cascade effect that happens once you believe it. That you're made in the image of God, that he knew you before you were created, that all of these things.
You're loved unconditionally.
Yeah, that you there's a trickle down effect, and a lot of this depression and stuff can at least there's at least a path carved out on how to handle all of it. Nick, do you have any thoughts on any of that?
Well, yeah, I think. Well, one thing is this movie would not have been made today.
Absolutely
Like
not.
this is just the entire, just like even without the suicide aspect, the depression aspect of it, this is boys at a boarding school taught by a man as their mentor, damaged also by men. Like this movie shows all aspects of both the good and the damage that men can do. Like you have the mentor who's trying to invest and to bring the best out of his students, and one of the kind of themes, and I think Robin Williams' character says it a few times throughout, is I thought education was teaching them to think for themselves. Right. Everyone's trying to educate them in a way that just gets them to the answer or the book answer, and he's trying to educate them in a way that teaches them to actually think for themselves, to process things. And so you have these these boys who are sent away from their families to be educated, right? So the issues that could come up there, and I'm sure that there's exceptions to this, but the absenteeism of your parents not being there to walk you through pains and struggles and things like that. You're absent from them, you're separate from them, and you're living elsewhere. And they've basically outsourced teaching you to grow up, right? So
Yeah.
the absent, and then this distant authority figure who sent you away somewhere is now dictating your life on what direction it has to go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's your father, it's your dad, but this distant figure who sent you away to be educated is trying to exercise his power and authority over what direction you have, or at the very least, that's the way you perceive it. Because I think the dad in the story would say this is just what he thinks is best, right? He's not intentionally trying to hurt his son, but he's doing what he thinks is best.
Well,
But just the damage that can do
right.
to a child.
Right. So I want to jump in here about the dad, because the dad was brought up. So in the movie, and I'm kind of going off script here from my notes.
Do we have a script?
We never have a script. Even if we write one, we
didn't
we
get
don't
the script.
we don't follow it. So in the movie, the dad, or I'm sorry, let me
Neil's
start over.
dad.
Neil's dad.
Mhm.
But in the movie, the quote from Thoreau is, "Most men lead lives of quiet desperation."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if we take that and we apply it to dad, what's the dad's or Neil's father? What's his whole point of everything that he's doing? The whole motivation for putting so much pressure on his son is because he is so desperate, quietly desperate, that his son ends off better than him financially.
Yeah, he was never given those opportunities.
He was never given those
Mhm.
opportunities, and he is desperate to have his son be more successful than him. Which, in turn, the split of that is that Neil, as the son, is living a life of quiet desperation because he's not getting to do what he wants to do with his life.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
it's
This is
this.
being exposed to him of what he actually wants out of life.
Well, he was never even, and then I'm reminded of the scene where they're walking, and they start like in the courtyard, and they start walking, right, and they're walking on their own individual way, and then all of a sudden they start to pick up that rhythm, and they, so the point of that is that the tradition is not wrong in itself. The tradition is only wrong when you don't have the knowledge or the ability to think outside of the tradition. So I just think that, kind of coming back to Dad and Neil, I just think that it's interesting to see that the authority within that realm of that desperation can still lead to harm, if that makes sense, because they're both desperate,
Yeah.
but they're doing things for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right. Well, I know, because you have Neil who finally is able to see differently, like see a bright light, see something that is worth living for,
Mhm.
and he gets to use his gift. He acknowledged that after the performance, man, I did good. He was proud of himself. I
Right.
applied myself. I did it, and so then to lose that, because the dad didn't want that, and
mhm.
then all of a sudden, he had, so Neil at that one point at the end, he had hope. He was just excited that he wanted to live, in this direction, to head in this direction for his career. And he loved it, and it energized him. But then his dad obviously said, shut the door on that. So not only am I shutting the door, but I'm taking you away from all your friends. You're not going to the school anymore, and you're going to be a doctor for the next 10 years. And all of a sudden, the light that Neil had just turned off,
Right.
and he
right.
saw no hope anymore.
Right.
So hard.
Well, it's tough because we did a podcast. Actually, it was our very first podcast on.
I was getting ready to bring that up too.
On fences.
Yeah.
And the entire point of the podcast with fences was about honoring dishonorable parents. And where where that line is, because what is it? Exodus. I think it's Exodus 20:12. The 10 Commandment, where that you shall honor thy mother and father.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no exception.
Right. Well, I wrote that down. That is, I mean,
So where
we have
do
commandments that weren't followed here. In the movie,
so
for
where
sure.
does earthly authority stop in terms of what we want to do with our own lives, what our gifts are, what are like spiritual gifts or just what we feel inclined to do? Where does that I think really what it does is it sets the tone for how important like authority is and the responsibility we have as parents
Right.
and elected officials or whatever type of authority it is, teachers, educators, whatever, to really seek after that and not project what we think people should do, whether it's your kids or your students.
I mean, honestly, I think it just hit me now is, again, uh, nobody's perfect, right? So we're never going to get all the right answers as parents and,
Right,
and
right.
things like that. But I think when you start your day submitting your life to Christ and God, help me to be the best parent I can to my kids and help convict me if I need to be convicted and show me the right direction. I think it's so easy to just get used, just follow life and just do whatever and go through the motions and things like that. But when
Right.
you are intentional every morning, man, God, I want to be led by you and led by the Spirit and help me on these tough situations.
Right.
Help me to see
Mhm.
things from your perspective.
Nick?
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Um, well, just to I guess add to that is the father and the Neil's dad. Again, he doesn't even know he's doing damage.
No, it's true.
Right.
Like he's oblivious to the amount of damage that he's doing to his son. He just doesn't know it because I mean,
Ugh.
Well, Neil
not
could,
that he
yeah.
wouldn't be, but
Yeah.
his reaction when he sees his son laying on the floor,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. All of a sudden,
After,
he was humanized in the movie,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because in that moment you see, oh, this guy wasn't just being a jerk for being jerk's sake,
Right.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
he's still doing the wrong thing by his son. He's still not being that honorable parent. He's not making it easy on his son to treat him with respect and to honor him, which is one of the things that we talked about in that fences episode,
Yep.
that
Right.
along with that command to honor your father and your mother comes the responsibility of father and mother to be honorable,
Right.
to
Well,
do what they can to be honorable.
Yeah. To live above reproach and yeah, for
Mhm.
sure.
so I have written down scriptures here, and I have two versions of it. So Colossians chapter 3, verse 20 and 21. It says, "Children, always obey your parents, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not aggravate your children or they will become discouraged." And then the message version of that, and I don't usually look at the message. I try to look at different scriptures and different versions just to kind of see, but this so fit the movie. This next version of, again, Colossians 3, verses 20 and 21. It just says, "Parents, don't come down too hard on your children or you'll crush their spirit." And I just kind of wrote to the point of suicide. I mean, not that, I'm blaming the dad for the suicide. Obviously, that was Neil's choice, and he just didn't see any hope in that. And I love that you pointed out, Nick, that the dad didn't even realize that he was damaging his son. He had no clue, because when he came to visit Neil, and Neil was all excited because he wanted to do something else. It was before he even wanted to perform in this play, but he's something else, some other club that he wanted to be a part of. And his dad's like, no, no, no. And
It
then
was like a newsletter or something,
right,
wasn't
right,
it?
and
Yeah.
yeah, you don't have time. And
Right.
and Neil he shut down. He didn't speak up for himself. He just said, okay, So
Right.
there was an opportunity there for Neil to try to talk to his dad and just say, man, help, I want, this is why I want to do these things. I feel like I can grow through these opportunities, and I'm getting great grades. Defend himself a little bit, respectfully, of
Mhm.
course. But I think that's really important here in this movie, is that, man, up to the point of Todd at the very end, where he finally stands up for Mr. Keating because they put the blame on him falsely. And man, finding your voice, finding your voice, finding your voice. And you just see that through each of these
It's interesting
boys'
that
lives.
it's interesting to me that you say find your voice because in Neil's case, he couldn't find his voice because the way his father was fathering
Yeah.
stole it from him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Mhm.
it almost painted a picture of part of being an honorable father, specifically to this movie, I would say the same thing for mothers too. It's just the power of the father is much different than than being a mother.
Good question.
And um, there is a time for a father to take his son and make a man, but there's such a fine line with how harsh you are in certain situations, and a lot of that too goes back to I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, just that relationship aspect of a father. Going like the churchy thing is always like father and like daddy, kind of more relational.
Sure.
And if you are all just kind of structured dad, you dehumanize yourself, and your son doesn't feel, or your kids don't feel like they can talk to you.
Right.
And in this situation, that's what's happening. Is
Highway
dad
or the
is
highway.
Yeah, it's just this is the way it is, and there's no discussion. So you steal your kid's voice, and then you get upset at the kids for not communicating.
Right.
It just doesn't. It just doesn't.
Well, man, that
It's not
balance
rational.
there, right? So you have the dad who's not allowing his voice, Neil's voice, but then you have Mr. Keating who's like, your voice matters.
Right.
You
Right.
know? Like, man, that
It's just
balance
such a
there.
yeah, and then that's why, and that tension is why Neil ultimately killed himself, is because he
Right.
didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
You
Like,
know-
I see that, man, I do have this
Like,
opportunity.
I want to honor my dad.
Right.
I want to do that, but I have to let this light in me out.
Yeah.
Like, I have to do that, and then I've got this other honorable man who's not my father telling me to feed that,
Rightfully so.
but I don't know how to handle all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then the choice that he made was obviously to shoot himself,
Right. And
which
so,
is
like, how do we as Jesus followers then? And I know we can't prevent it to a point, right? They're going to do it. Some kids or people are going to do it regardless. But man, how can we lean into this generation right now that is hurting so bad, so fearful, so depressed, and full of anxiety? Like, how do we lean into them even more so? Because I feel like they need more right now than they ever have before. I could be wrong, but that's what it feels like.
I think my perspective is it's the church's responsibility to capture the parents first, because there's no replacement for good parenting. If we look at it from a youth ministry perspective, I don't actually think we can overcome bad parenting by being we saw it in the movie.
Right.
Let's blanket that, since we both serve in the same youth ministry. Mr. Keating's is Josh or whoever, right? Me or you. That's who Mr. Keating is, and the student is the student, and we're combating parents like that. So I think the students are the symptoms of parenting. Now, I don't think that parents have all to blame, because kids are going to be kids,
right? And they're influenced by their friends.
Yeah, right. There's other influences there, but it starts with godly parents being honorable and growing their kids in the Word, and
admitting failure.
All of those things that support being an honorable leader, honorable parent. But then also teaching your kids, what God says about them. I think that's where it has to start. Nick, what do you think?
I mean, I'm right there with you. Not that there's not, like, just like if you were to use that same analogy with the movie, to use that as kind of a structure of it, you can have a youth ministry, and that can change a lot of kids' lives. But I definitely agree. So, like in the movie, you have Keating, and then you have at the end, you have all the students stand up on their desk, and that's kind of the show that look at the impact you have made. So even though there was good and there was bad, Keating made a very positive, good impact on students, even though one student couldn't ultimately, stick around for that, or, their suffering was to the point where it just wasn't going to happen. But I'm right there with you that it comes back to godly parenting. And so I kind of want to take it back to that dad again. And you, Parker, mentioned trying to strike the balance between, I think what you said was helping your son to become a man, but then also where's the balance of like the intimacy and things like that. Now imagine that. So I'm going to assume that the dad in this story was meant to be a loving dad. Okay, like
Or that was
he
his
loves,
intention.
That's what he
yeah,
was
he
capable of, is
loves
what we was
his
giving
son.
out.
So I'm not in the head of the writers, but that seems to be what comes out of it. But now imagine if that dad who loves his son was actually present to see the process of his son falling in love with acting. But he wasn't present because he sent his son away to be educated.
True.
He didn't see that. He didn't get to see his son fall in love with this thing and then come alongside of him and actually give him direction on how to make that successful. To dad, my son went away. He's still the same kid that he was before he left my house.
Oof.
And this is our direction.
He had him in a
He
box.
didn't see the process of his son falling. And just for just speaking as from my perspective as a parent, when you see your child fall in love with something, parts of you start to love that thing too. Not because necessarily you feel the same level of interest or you want to pursue that for yourself, but you see their joy when they're experiencing things that they love. Lincoln loves to draw and do art and do stuff like that. So like when she's doing that, like it brings me joy to see her joyous, right? It brings me joy to see her enjoying that. But this father is distant and doesn't see any of that taking place. Now imagine if he would have seen his son falling in love with this thing. Like whether,
there definitely would have been a difference.
There'd be a different perspective that he didn't have.
Right.
And it comes down to he wasn't there.
Which is his fault.
Right. Now, he made the decision that sending my son away to be educated at this school is going to ultimately help him to reach the goals that I have for him. And he, doing that. But at the end of the day, nothing is a substitute for a present father.
And then I would add, I guess in harmony with that, if you do change that, it's your responsibility as a parent to bridge the gap. Mm-hmm. So like, because what we're not saying is there anything wrong with a boarding school, like inherently wrong with a boarding school, or sending your kid away to even like a sports clinic or anything like that. The wrongdoing as a parent is not owning that decision and still going to be a part of your kid's experience and just sending them off and
well, I mean, we have to remember,
fend for themselves.
Like back then, there were no cell phones and texting and
Mm-hmm.
so that's a different context too. Is back then they didn't have ways to stay connected. So when you did send them off, you only saw them every however many months.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's a huge distance.
And all of this growing up, all of this change, all of these things are taking place. Struggles, anxiety over grades, like all of this stuff is taking place in all of those students' lives, and none of their parents have any idea about it.
Yeah.
It's just happening separate from them. Whereas, in a more traditional environment, at the very least, the parent is present, seeing these things take place, even if they handle it poorly, even if they don't know what to do about it, even if they still end up making the same decisions, they're present, seeing the process take place. They're seeing their child grow and mature in certain ways, and it's just absent.
And we're moving on a little bit here. I mean, this still kind of fits, but how pompous and dehumanizing did they make the leaders of the school?
Oh my gosh!
Oh yeah,
like
they totally did.
Like
sure.
how Nick's gonna make fun of me because I bring this book up all the time. But I read a book called "Always Ready" by Bonson.
Here we go again.
I know, right? And in the book, it talks about, and I'm still trying to understand it. It's been a long time. I mean, probably 8 months of reading this book.
Wow.
It's a headache, but unbelieving thought and neutrality and different things like that. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind, strength, and there's just such an autonomous view of knowledge by the education committees and the people who run the school. From the beginning of the movie, they're like, "Oh, this is the candle of knowledge." and it's going to come from the school to the students, and then they light the candle down the road, or down the row of the whatever that chapel or whatever that is, and
Cathedral, maybe.
And there's no basis of knowledge like in the scriptures. It's all just human autonomous tradition.
Excellent.
Yeah. And all those things can be good. I mean those are good characteristics to have, but if it's not rooted in Christ, then it's all in vain.
Yeah. There's no grounding whatsoever.
I mean, they say
just
prayer
treat it as this is what is.
It's just prayers, like for sake of prayer. I don't know. It seemed icky.
It set the tone for it's very secular. It's very
Yeah.
non-God. You know?
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
godless, I should say.
Yeah.
So true. I just have to say, 'cause it's
Catholic.
just I mean, so let's go back to the beginning of the movie, and you have all of them coming to the school, just like you said, you're at the beginning,
Right.
you're at the ceremony. But when Todd meets Neil, and Neil obviously is has the friends, and you have Todd, who's very awkward,
Right.
and doesn't have a voice yet, clearly.
Very low social kind of cueing, and
Yeah.
just doesn't want to speak. Yeah,
Yes,
for sure.
and
By the way, I would be Todd. That's
really,
me.
really.
That's yes. that
Today,
is who
or that's where you were in high school.
I mean, in certain aspects, still now, but that is me. That is who I relate with in the movie more than anybody.
And
You can relate to that person, but I doubt Todd would ever get on a podcast.
Well, I wouldn't have in high
nice.
school either.
Got him.
that was
I
that was
wouldn't have- I
encouraging
wouldn't
right
have in
there.
high school either. So.
But I just love that his journey. Like, I think that's almost one of my favorite parts in the movie is just watching him at the very beginning, really distant from even having friends. Like kind of like, no, I'm good. I got to study. And he has this brother, right, that achieved so much, and so he has to kind of live in his shadow. So that's hard. And then so he really feels the pressure there of having to measure up to that standard. And then the friends that are trying to, grow him, like, let's have friendship. Let's enjoy this time while you're here. And then to the point where, he is trying to write the poems, and then Mr. Keenan gets him up in front of everybody.
How
And closes his
powerful is
eye.
that
Oh
scene?
my gosh, right. That was awesome. And so you have at the beginning of the movie who he's barely able to speak and have a voice. And then for him to then at the end be the one that stands up for justice, stands up for truth, stands up for knowing what's right, and using his voice at the right time. It was just so powerful. I was a mess, crying, and
Yeah, and here's another thing. I don't want to keep, beating a dead horse, but out of all of the kids, out of all the students, who had the worst relationship with their parents? It had to be Todd, right?
you think so? We didn't see his parents too much, though.
But that
I'm not
I
sure.
thought that was
You
kind of the
think so?
point, because you have a
Oh,
parent
good point.
who is never around, who forgets the birthday
Oh,
gift
Oh, the
right.
gift! It gets the same
You're
thing
right.
every year.
every year.
Oh, I forgot about
So
that.
how
part.
so
True.
what's interesting is I know it's hard to rate feelings and subjective kind of
Sure.
thought and all of that,
Yeah.
but here we have Neil who commits suicide because his dad wouldn't let him do what he wanted, but the kid who stays alive and doesn't choose that route had no parents.
No support. No.
So think about
Love.
like had nothing.
Yeah.
It was just like
No
they were just
attention.
absent. Like wasn't even a person, was invisible
Yeah,
his
well-
whole life, and that's
Mm.
so then no wonder why he shows up to Welton and not speak, not whatever. I'm just nothing.
Wow. And then his friend. So again, it's very similar to our church right now. We have this series about direction determines your destination. So again, who you surround yourself is super important. And so I love that, from our perspective, we know how God works things out. So, God essentially gives these great group of guys to lift him up and give him the teacher, the mentor that he needed. And
Right.
it's just such a good movie.
Really good.
So I feel like I have to clarify something now.
Uh-oh.
In saying that I am Todd, I was not thinking about the relationship with the parents, because I always had a absolutely fantastic relationship with my parents and still do. But that is an incredibly interesting point, because I didn't even think about the gift being repeated.
Yeah, I forgot
And
about
it's
that. too.
even more kind of powerful that the one who committed suicide is the one who teaches Todd how to handle that.
Yeah.
Let's throw it away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let it
It
fly.
felt good for him. Yeah,
Yeah,
which is so
yeah.
true. Right. That's it's so true. Like that just it, and again, that's how instant you can go from being so full of hope and love and excitement for life, and then 1 second it just shut off like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why the suicide rate is so high. All of a sudden, their lights turn off. They don't see the hope. They don't see a way out, and that's what's just so devastating. Devastating.
Well, I also think that they're not taught how to handle. They're not. There's a gap in. I mean,
It's always the people you never expect.
Yeah, there's a I just think that there's a gap in understanding how to handle stress, and it stems from poor parenting.
And maybe education. Like, let's talk about real life. Like, yeah, math is important. Yes, science is important. But let's talk about how life gets hard.
Right. Well, yeah, I think, yeah. I agree.
Yeah. We should be teachers.
We're going to disagree, and then all of a sudden,
no, it's not that I disagree. It's just I still think parents have the responsibility to teach their kids that what they do as education is important. Knowing math, knowing science, knowing whatever is important, but it's not as important as understanding what God says about you and understanding that that like the gospel and having like being able to function in society and different things like that. And yes, education is a part of that, but who was it? It was Albert Einstein even said, "I'll never let my schooling get in the way of my education." So I mean, that's something that's really powerful.
Yeah, it is. Real life stuff.
It's it's not just structure and pass the test. Like, wake up, go to class, pass the test. It's this ritual that there's other ways to learn.
God still loves you if you fail a class, fail a test, if you don't make the team, if you all these things that we
where we put our self-worth. That's the issue. It's because in our society we idolize famous athletes and celebrities, and then we start to idolize the mechanisms in which they exist. Either the education system, or we idolize it because it's a means to make money and be like. I don't think that we start with a poor motive. Like, you want your kids to be educated so that they can go and make money and then provide for themselves, but it's not. But ultimately, it's not going to bring them salvation. It's not going to bring them satisfaction or anything. There's deeper ways to find those things, and I think when we misplace that, whether it's education or sports or fame or whatever, there's a degradation in self-worth that can only be filled by, like what we would say is Christ from our presuppositional standpoint. So,
just to hit that point harder,
love and those things,
your identity. Like, man, if I would have known in high school, in college, that my identity is in Jesus, that He loves me, that He has, like Psalm 139, He has just countless thoughts to me, wonderful thoughts to me that outnumber the grains of sand on all the beaches. I mean, it just, when you think about that, man, He created you for His purpose, for this time. He has such beautiful plans for you that He already knows, and has wired you in such a unique way. When, man, if you can get that early on, I mean, that changes everything. Because then you have a confidence, a self-confidence. It's really a God confidence, right? That it doesn't matter if you fail. God will use it for part of your testimony, or
help someone else.
Help someone else that's failed or missed the mark, or God loves us humble. It is so important when you have that strong foundation that you are created because He chose you. You are here for Him.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Nick. Jump in if you have anything. But it kind of reminds me. So it kind of reminds me of I don't know if you guys saw this floating around YouTube or the internet or whatever. But there's this military guy who's giving a speech at a graduation, and I forget kind of some of the details around where or whatever. But he says, in the morning, wake up and make your bed, and be diligent and disciplined about doing that every morning, because it doesn't matter what happens. I'm paraphrasing here, but get up and make your bed and then go about your day, because it doesn't matter what happens in the day, because at least you can come home and you come home to a made bed. at least you did that right today. You can start and end your day on a good note, like a success is the point. And it kind of coming back to that is like, okay, so if we start with I am a son or daughter of the Most High God. I've been saved. I've been redeemed. I can find peace with God. And then no matter what happens in our lives, no matter what happens, good, bad, ugly, whatever, death, cancer, fame, fortune, whatever happens, we can always come back to that baseline of this is who I am. And when you don't have that, like, where do you go?
Yeah.
It makes a lot more
Self-worth
sense
is in so many other things. Like it's in
that
your
are
job.
fleeting.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so when you don't have that, suicide makes a little bit more sense why you would choose that.
And
Go ahead.
so I want to jump off of what you were saying, and that is probably actually the biggest point where the movie falls short, because the message of, so you have two conflicting ways that man is, I guess. You have, the quote of most men live lives of quiet desperation, and you have Keating trying to teach his students to not be that, not to live lives of quiet desperation, to find their voice. And, with that quote, seize the day, make your lives extraordinary. Making yourself extraordinary is presented as the antidote to quiet desperation.
Yes, absolutely.
When in actuality, what is happening is you've just replaced one type of desperation for a new type of desperation.
Self-worth.
It's still about you working to make yourself something.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. 100%
Whereas
agree.
the flip side from a Christian perspective is that we trust in Christ's extraordinary work to make us something.
Right.
And that we get to live free of the pressure to be extraordinary.
Yeah.
We get to live free of that burden and of that weight. And so the movie is very, I mean, obviously it's motivating. It's like, I want to be extraordinary. I want to have an extraordinary life, but at what cost? Am I profiting the world and losing my soul? So that idea that in trusting in Christ's righteousness, he's come to give life and give abundant life, right?
Right.
What's more extraordinary than that? Than everyday obedience to Christ, doing what he has called us to, even in the smallest little things, because he takes those ordinary things that extraordinary men might call just ordinary things that you're doing in quiet desperation, but God takes those very things and makes them extraordinary.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they serve him and his purpose.
Yeah, and I think too, just kind of going off of that, like if we were to teach our kids, because your identity is in God first and most importantly, but then when you go through those lessons in life where it's hard, it hurts, it's whether it's a breakup or it's a failure or whatever, a wrong decision, regret, shame, whatever, that God can use it. God wants us humble, and just letting the children know, letting the students know that what, it's okay to fail, and God will use it for his glory. If you let him, you have to it's a choice, but just understanding that that's part of life. That's how we learn. Sometimes we learn by somebody telling us, like, don't do this because this is what happened to me when I did it. Some people can learn like that. Some people can't. Some people learn by doing it themselves and learning the hard way.
Right.
So, but just if we allow, we just encourage the kids out there or the parents doing the same, that they expect to fail at times. God loves us humble.
That's
like,
so
it's
important.
okay. It's okay. God, you are going to fail. You're not perfect. God didn't make you perfect on purpose. We're all on this journey, right? We're all learning, and we all learn in different situations and the different, circumstances that we walk through. But man, if we can just really pour that into anybody that's on our path, like, one, your identity is in God. And, it's okay when bad things happen, because that's kind of how we get humbled. And that's a really important quality of being a Christian, is understanding that, nope, I'm not perfect, but God's there for me to just lean on him, and he can use it if I let him.
Right. And that's actually a good springboard. So I wrote down in my notes, the title "Men Who Think Freely Are Dangerous," and I think we need dangerous men today, because you have this interesting relationship between, and I think I brought this up at the beginning of the podcast, but you have the school leaders, you have the parents, and then you have the students, and the students are learning from Keating. There's kind of a what would be the word, a rogue kind of free thinking, like go against the grain, do kind of do you, and the scene where Keating, so the student stands up in the thing after they get caught with the Dead Poets Society, and the phone goes off, and he's like, ring, 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 whatever. Hey, it's God. Girls should be admitted into Welton, right? Well, Keating walks into the room, and he's in the scene where he's in the chair, and Keating walks in, and he's saying it's not to be combative. There, and then he and I forget exactly what he says. I didn't write it down, but he says something to the effect of part of being a free thinker is to know when to follow and when to not. And that discernment, I think, is really vital. And I think that in our society today, to be a free thinker with, being an American and having freedoms, knowing when to follow the government and when to follow God, and that's, I think, where the movie fell short as well. Obviously, it's a secular movie, but from our presuppositions as Christians, when do we follow man's traditions and when do we follow God's? And Romans 13 talks about, being in submission to the government until the government goes against God, because that's our ultimate authority is God. So I think there's a similarity there in the movie to say, man's traditions, because they were big on traditions, and then we would bring God's traditions, and the only ones we're following are God's. So you've got to have that hierarchicalized appropriately, so that you're in the right accordance to following the right way, I guess. So
Oh, then that almost challenges thinking like, okay, so we just talked about the story of Joseph and our high school group, and just thinking about how he was used by God through all these trials. And so I almost am thinking then, should they have, just like you're bringing up authority, so they should have been listening to the authorities of the school, and then once they graduate and not under their authority, then they walk out and they're free. I don't know. That's tough.
yeah, that's a really tough one. I don't know if I have an answer for that one, but definitely if
because God.
Yeah.
So if you're following the authority like you're supposed to, and just very similar to Joseph, and he's doing that, right? So he does so well. He's helping the prison guard. He does so well. He became Potiphar's second-hand guy, or first-hand guy, or whatever. But and he's constantly, wherever God puts him, he's flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
So I guess what I'm saying is, from the perspective of the students, let's say, because we see this in the movie, they essentially coerced the students to sign the paper saying that Keating was at fault. Mm-hmm. Okay, so at that moment, it's okay. Do I follow and give them what they want, and lie? Because that's what they're asking them to do, or do I follow God and tell the truth? And essentially, after they signed it, because they're kids,
because they didn't want to be kicked out, right?
So
I get that.
How do you So free thinking,
wrath from their parents,
discerning when to follow, when to not is powerful, and it becomes dangerous to authorities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in America, that's why we're seeing so much government overreach, is because if you keep a people fearful, you can control them.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw that with COVID.
Right, absolutely. We saw that with COVID.
But then that's what makes Todd's standing on the desk so awesome.
Is
because he was fighting for justice. He was fighting
truth.
for truth. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
I was like, yes.
So good.
Good job, Todd.
So good.
Yeah. Oh, that was such a powerful moment.
It was a great.
But movie. So interesting. So when I was talking to my husband about this, he kind of brought up a situation that I wouldn't even, or a symbolism maybe might be the right word there. That you have Jesus, who had his people around him, right? So maybe you put Mr. Keating as Jesus, for example,
Mm-hmm.
situation. And right when Jesus needed his guys the most, they ran, they bailed, they denied him. And so what we're seeing with Mr. Keating is same thing. Like, he's obviously innocent, and he did, he mentored these boys well, obviously.
Right.
But right when he needed them the most to speak up and not sign the paper because they didn't believe, they knew. I mean, the first guy that, the rat, they called him, I forget his name right now, but he's like, they're not free, they didn't want to expel you, they're just trying to have Keating take the rap for it. So standing up at that point of, don't lie, like you're saying.
I think the kid that punched the other kid is absolutely justified.
Yeah.
That's my position.
Yeah, exactly.
If that was my son, I would be proud of him.
But just that symbolism of, man, Peter denied Jesus.
Yep.
And the only apostle that was with Jesus when he was crucified was John. So everybody else had failed because of fear or for whatever reason.
Right.
So I just thought, wow, I never would have put that together.
Yeah, and I think just how steady Keating was in spite of the
same thing with Jesus, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
just
chill, able to handle it,
unwavering. Just I get it, man. It's okay.
Yeah, not defensive, not not taking it out on anybody.
Warm and loving in spite of the betrayal.
Right. Jesus was betrayed. So.
Because and the grace there is because he knows their kids. Like that's I think that's so powerful. Is I know your kids and you have to follow your parents, and your parents are wrong. Like, I'm not going to blame you.
Yeah, again, just put that. It's exactly what Jesus' last words were, right? He's like, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And they really didn't. Even the apostles didn't really know, like the.
Yeah.
Oh, like, man, like you're missing it.
Right.
This is the most powerful moment. And they just didn't even realize the impact that they kind of were bought into. Like, let's just talk about the Jews, right?
Right.
They were bought into or ruling. They were kind of fearful of Jesus taking over. I don't know, just changing the system. And but just when you think about it like that, you
right, for sure.
But he said, forgive them. They don't really know. They're children.
Yeah,
they really don't know. And God sees us as his children. And so when we mess up, he's like, man, they don't get it yet. They're not on that part of the journey where they get the impact this is going to have, their consequences that's going to have, or whatever. And that's why he just is so full of grace and so merciful.
Right.
That he knew all of this and still chose to send Jesus to pay for our sins, walk in his grace.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Anything else, Nick?
I do have one more thing. I don't want to drag on too much or go too long, but
we're not even at an hour yet, believe it or not.
We're not even at an hour yet.
We
Good.
got a minute 30.
Then I'll take my time and just
go for it. 20
we'll
more minutes. Nick's,
preach a sermon.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nick's dissertation on the WatchWell podcast.
So we referenced it earlier, but the scene where Todd gets up and Keating he didn't do the assignment, right? And Keating has him get up and close his eyes, describe what you see, describe the things, and tell me more about that blanket, right? Before I start, I just want to get some thoughts. What did you think of what Todd eventually says? Just the example, the blanket that always leaves your feet cold, right? Just what comes to mind when you guys think about that, if anything? If nothing, that's fine too.
Go ahead.
Well, I really hadn't thought about it until you actually talked about his parents. Feeling maybe the coldness from them, like just not physically, but emotionally, feeling just cold and you're not comfortable. You're not loved. I don't know.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is something that's not sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
And
he says it'll never be enough.
It'll never be enough. Yeah. So it's something that's not sufficient. And yeah, I mean, you could.
Now knowing that he walked in his brother's shadow, I'll never measure up to that and that
Mhm.
standard. Or
Yeah. I mean, I mean, I mean, sufficiency, you can apply that a lot of different ways
Yep.
biblically. So,
So
comparison trap.
what I'm seeing there is, so I think it's significant that it's a blanket. Okay. So not just, I think it's significant that the picture that's being painted in that scene is a blanket
because the purpose of
and
a
not
blanket,
something else.
yeah, the purpose of a
Right.
blanket is to make you
It's to-
warm.
and it's to cover you.
Yeah.
So what is a blanket, a covering that will never be enough and is always insufficient, is the works and personal righteousness and
Right.
of man.
Right.
That blanket
That's good.
will never be enough.
That's good.
No
man.
matter how much we work, no matter how much we try, it is nothing more than a blanket that always leaves our feet cold. And no matter how you stretch it, no matter how you move it, it'll never be enough. And that is us working for righteousness, because the Bible also calls Christ's righteousness a covering. That Christ's righteousness covers us sufficiently.
Multitude of sins. Yeah. Mm.
So that's just something that I saw there. Is you get that picture of something that will never be enough. And if you're a Christian, if you put your faith in Christ, then you have something that's always enough, that's always sufficient, that'll never leave your feet cold per se, and will always leave you with comfort and peace. So the comparison there, I thought, even beyond just the aspect of Todd breaking out of his shell and being um, presenting something in that manner and finding a voice, even the specifics of what he's talking about, I think points to a reality that the writers probably never even intended.
But God did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the
So
point.
cool. Yeah,
the point.
exactly.
I'm gonna close it off here real
Okay,
quick.
okay.
I'm gonna read this. So this is Acts 17. We're gonna start in the middle of verse 22. Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription: to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in the temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all of the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries in their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him.
So, okay. So at the very beginning, we talked about seize the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so important for a Christian walk.
Mm-hmm.
Like just knowing that every single day you have an opportunity to partner with God to help whoever he puts in your path, and, we very similar to the movie. It talks about how you're at the end of your life and you just have all this regret because you didn't do anything. But God's giving us this opportunity every single day to partner with him, to carry his presence everywhere we go, to be his hands and feet. And we have this opportunity to just be excited for every day. Whether it's he's teaching us something, it's we're learning dependence on him through a hard situation, or we get to pray for somebody or pay attention. Like, oh, they seem off. Let's lean in. So just seize the day for me was just so what I feel like God is calling us for. Man, like I want to use you. I want you to be my vessel out there. And we get a choice. We don't have to say yes. But man, when we follow him, that's where the most satisfying part of life is when we choose him and we say yes. And we're like, and we ask for opportunities. God, I want to be used by you today. Help me to bless whoever you want me to bless, and let it be your words.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
Yep. That was fun. First guest successful.
First guest successful.
I'm your first guest.
You are.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You didn't tell me that.